that in addition to the summary for policymakers, the technical summary and full report, we also have several other resources, including a global to regional atlas. We have also extracted critical regional information into a series of fact sheets. To the questions now, can you address the sense of gloom and foreboding in the future painted here? How less livable a world do you see if major emission cuts and adaptations aren't made? And how big a problem do you see climate migration and climate-connected conflict?
I would rephrase that. I don't think the report gives a sense of gloom. What it does do, though, is it gives a very serious reality check about where we are, where we might go to, but also provides us with a sense that we can be agents for change. So I think that's the important message to take forward. A difficult reality, but action is possible, and we need to do it now.
The choice should not be gloom and doom. The options are clear, and the choices are clear. So the world has a limited time window available to move on the right track. So the collaboration of science and the media is important. But what is also important is to improve the understanding of these basic rules of how life best functions on our planet. There are natural laws that we should not break and that should not be broken in similar ways as we do not cross red traffic lights. By following these options, it gives us hope that a sustainable and climate-resilient world can be achieved.
The report paints a grim prospect for Africa and small islands, developing states. Are there alternative solutions for short and long term to alter direction from grim opportunities?
Indeed, as I said before, the report is a real reality check, and it's particularly a reality check for the developing areas of the globe. Africa is called out, the small island states, Asia, Central and South America. So I think while these areas are threatened, there is no doubt that there is room for improvement, both in terms of global partnerships to foster sustainable development, but also to use the enormous natural resources of continents like Africa as a way to tackle the climate change challenge.
If increasingly clear warnings about the existential risks of climate change are not driving anywhere near sufficient action, how do we drive that needed action?
Well, I'm afraid to say that increasing climate change and the associated impacts and risks and their implementation are certainly an important motivation for the mobilization we need in society and in policy. So calling out climate change as an ally in that mobilization is certainly not a good perspective. We would rather like to see the risks being reduced and those impacts being avoided. But climate change already gives us strong examples of what can happen if the climate system is brought out of the balance that it has had for the last 8,000 years during the time when human civilization was built. And this in-depth understanding will mobilize the action and the resources that are needed for this task.
Perhaps just building on that response, I think what is powerful about our Working Group 2 report is that we speak to the very places that people live, work, and relax in. We've got a very strong regional focus. And I think that enables us to bring messaging that increases the agency of human society. And I think it's by providing that very clear line of sight between where I live and the problems I face to the kind of solutions I may be involved in, empowers people to take action. And I think we see that more and more as the science becomes clearer and relates more and more to people's lives. People mobilize more. And so I'm still optimistic about the ability to mobilize extensively around this report and create the kind of societal response that we need to see.
Any short-term action and any compromise with respect to other sectors and compromises are an important part of the political thinking and action should have the long-term implications in mind. So any decisions to be made during this crucial decade in climate policy are important for our long-term fate and for the sustainability of life on this planet. Thank you.
You mentioned cities being key sites for positive climate action. What are some of the most effective systems and strategies you have seen work practically on a citywide level, and what enhances their efficacy?
The opportunities in urban areas are multiple around planning and design of infrastructure, bringing nature back into the city. Our report points out very clearly that if we bring nature back into the city, protect our floodplains, have trees along our streets, we can do a great deal to increase our adaptive capacity to deal with the impacts of floods, heat stress, improve health. And so there's a real advantage in reconceptualizing our cities, not only as a place of people, but a place of nature. We know that we will have about 1 billion people living in low-lying coastal areas by the middle of the century that are particularly at risk because of the impacts of sea level rise, salination, flooding, heavy rainfall. And those are areas we would probably need to act on initially. We would need to think, for example, about coastal defenses, moving away from hard sea walls to more productive coastal ecosystems, early warning systems to enable people to know when risks are emerging and to make suitable plans. And the report is really important because it focuses us not only on the formal aspects of urban development, but calls out very strongly the informal settlements around the world where many of the most vulnerable live, and a call to start investing in our informal settlements to change the tide, both literally and figuratively.
With everything going on, how would you like this report to be interpreted and prioritized by policymakers and the world at large? And what do you expect from journalists to help keep the momentum going in the coming months and years?
This report strengthens the message around the agreement reached with the Paris Agreement, and it strengthens to move and push for the more ambitious side of it, by casting light on the most vulnerable ecosystems on the planet, on the most vulnerable people on the planet. And I think continued communication between scientists and the media, as well as policymakers, is needed to provide the information for ambitious action. There is also urgency in developing the education systems, educating the young and informing the adult population about these challenges will be key for ambitious global action.
Do you think individual change, that means change of way of life, is important at the same level of government and cooperation? Or people have to wait before a strong commitment at an institutional level first? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that important question, because it speaks to each one of us and the way we live our lives. And I think our report is very clear. It indicates that this has to be a whole of society response. So not a single individual, community, city, or government can opt out. We all need to opt into the solution. And a key part of that is obviously the way we live our lives, the choices we make about how we live those lives, but importantly, how we use our sense of agency in the world, how we engage with governance processes. There are many things that individuals cannot change and that rely on governments at all levels. But again, governments by themselves can't act alone, and we must see the private sector coming to the table as well. While action is happening, it's not rapid enough and it's uneven. So it's a really strong call for all of us to start doing the heavy lifting.
You have spoken about the numerous mitigation and technology options that are already available to society, and how political will is the major barrier to transformation. What does the Working Group 2 report tell us about how to build the political will that is necessary for change?
Ultimately, political and societal will is determined by what each of us as individuals prioritize as important in our lives. So it's important that we ourselves educate ourselves about the challenges we face and make those priorities known more broadly in society and to our leadership in order to encourage the political will that's necessary to take the bold and rapid action required in this decade.
This also concerns a global move to, for example, remove subsidies from fossil fuels. But the most important pillar certainly is and has been the mobilization of the young generation that we have seen, where the taking up the crucial information on climate change and its future challenges by the young generation and their concern about the future is and has been a very strong lever for political shifts that we have seen.
The results of the Working Group 2 analysis are not so surprising, since it is natural to believe that continued climate change brings more serious impacts on ecosystems and damages and losses. So what is, in your view, the real scientific value of the report and its impact on policies?
Overall, this study, this assessment, for the first time, assesses in very detail the impact of a temporary overshoot. And the report clearly indicates that there will be some impacts that will be irreversible, even if the temperature will return to 1.5 at the end of the century. This report, as already mentioned, identifies 127 key risks, and then shows how those key risks change along the temperature gradient changes. And these are quite a new messages that this report can deliver compared to our last reports. Hans?
Another advance that our report offers is really a systems understanding, an integrative understanding how the different lines of evidence come together. And from a systems point of view, this emerges as an underpinning framework for the concept of climate resilient development, which was already there, yes, during the 5th assessment report, but is much more comprehensively developed in our present report. And it shows that in that argumentation, that going for a combination of human health, ecosystem health, and finally at the highest complexity level, planetary health, is actually giving us hope for the future and should provide a vision and an orientation for concerted actions across the globe.